Well, I sent some questions and I would really love to start with passages and hear, which sections really stood or which paragraphs or even sentences really stood out for you. So my beginning is to be a listener, and then I'll give you my favorites.
Well, I'll jump in.
Great.
I have a not quite as old as my copy of the trial, but probably as old from college days. So I'm glad to have come back. But I don't know if the page numbering is the same, but it's in the time passes at the end of section 7. And it goes, in spring, the garden urns, casually filled with wind-blown plants, were gay as ever. Violets came and daffodils, but the stillness and the brightness of the day were as strange as the chaos and tumult of night, with the trees standing there and the flowers standing there, looking before them, looking up, yet beholding nothing, eyeless and so terrible.
Mm.
So why did I like it? Well, obviously that's a little existentialist, but we're talking about a place as a personality, and an atmosphere as a personality, and as all is decaying, it's like on the horror of meaningless or purposelessness as expressed by physical things.
Mm. Yeah.
Well, okay, I had a favorite line.
Hey, Jay.
Though before you came on, I said, I'm really waiting for Miriam because I need to listen on this one. I have to admit, I became somewhat tired reading the book, but
Yeah.
but so, and that's why maybe my favorite line is closer to the beginning of the book on page 38. And this is when Mrs. Ramsay was reading to her child to go to sleep. And when he finally went to sleep, it says, immediately Mrs. Ramsay seemed to fold herself together. One petal closed in another, and the whole fabric fell in exhaustion upon itself. Though she had only strength enough to move her fingers in exquisite abandonment to exhaustion across the pages of Grimm's fairy story, while they're throbbing through her, like the pulse in spring, which has expanded to fill with and gently cease to beat the rapture of successful creation.
Mm.
And that's when I guess I was still somewhat enthralled with her stream of conscience type of third-party presentation, which I became tired of later. But at this time, I thought it was very poetic.
Gorgeous, gorgeous passage. Yeah.
Was that all one sentence?
I'm sorry?
Was that one sentence?
Yes.
Wow.
The long
So
sentence.
that is the conclusion of a remarkable set of passages that is so sexual. It's amazing what she did, threading that from the bit, that sterile beak of masculinity that keeps. I mean, it's the whole passage is such a very thinly veiled metaphor for sex and procreation, and that's the conclusion of it, which is quite after the passion. It's worth hearing other views on what other people thought about that. I'm glad you picked it out.
What section is that? Because my pages are different.
Okay, it's page 38, and this is section very close to the, obviously, section 5.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Doreen, do you want to go or do you want me to jump?
I'll jump in. I didn't pick out a passage per se, but I was blown away by the dinner. I could read that whole dinner scene over and over and over again. The way the energy changes, the way she shifts the energy, the way she moves the people. Like, so often, all of that is in your head, or you notice it at a party, but I don't think I'd ever quite read it. And the way she got into her, like somebody is like a conductor orchestrating an orchestra, conducting an orchestra, orchestrating a party, and, aware of the energy of each person and trying. I just absolutely loved it. I could feel all of the different people and how she moved it. And then when she ended it, and the exquisiteness of the food and the awkwardness of the encounters between certain people and how she moves the energy. I mean, it just felt like a masterclass in movement of energy and noticing the littlest details. And I could read that over and over, and I identified with her. I could feel her. I could be inside her. I didn't feel that later with Lily. I couldn't feel her as much, and maybe that's why Jay got tired. But with that passage, that section, I just was blown away.
Okay, so I had a different experience because I listened to the book and I started actually right after the last one. So I listened off and on and I'd go to sleep to it and found it really, or wake up to it. So I'm going to play you a passage. I mean, I had a dozen or more bookmarks that I could have picked out. But this is one where she's falling asleep at the reading and she starts to doze off.
Very peaceful reading. He liked to think that everyone had taken themselves off and that he and she were alone. The whole of life did not consist in going to bed with a woman, he thought, returning to Scott and Balzac, to the English novel and the French novel. Mrs. Ramsay raised her head and, like a person in a light sleep, seemed to say that if he wanted her to wake, she would. She really would. But otherwise, might she go on sleeping just a little longer? Just a little longer. She was climbing up those branches, this way and that, laying hands on one flower and then another. Nor praise the deep vermilion in the rose, she read. And so reading, she was ascending, she felt, onto the top, onto the summit. How satisfying, how restful. All the odds and ends of the day stuck to this magnet. Her mind felt swept, felt clean. And then there it was, suddenly entire, shaped in her hands, beautiful and reasonable, clear and complete, the essence sucked out of life and held rounded here. The sonnet.
So that to me sort of was a nice, again, the book is filled with metaphor. So it's a metaphor for what what art is about in the book, which is, distilling these timeless, beautiful essences and out of the myriad, complexities and waves of thought and confusion. And so I loved the simplicity of the sonnet as the resolution to that passage.
I hat off to the narrator. I think to narrate, to do the audiobook must have been one of the most challenging things ever.
She is superb. She is quite superb. The voice, she's really, I almost couldn't imagine reading it because she just brings so much life to the characters, a lot of variety, and her diction is fabulous, as you can hear.
Yes, yes. Well, it was wonderful to hear your choices. They were so varied, from the kind of completeness and then bends, at the edge of chaos in the abyss, and then the dinner party as well. And then Jay's, your selection is also. I love the time passes section.
Mm.
And when I think about this novel, reading it this time, I felt the novel pulsed. It seemed to had this organic life, and it was pulsing and coming into focus and then blurring in a most extraordinary way. I think that had to do with her sentences and her descriptions. It was remarkable. But in the time passes, she has a section where the airs, this little wind comes into the house, and it's extraordinary. Nothing stirred in the drawing room or in the dining room or on the staircase. Only through the rusty hinges and swollen sea moistened woodwork, certain airs detached from the body of the wind. The house was ramshackled after all, crept round corners and ventured indoors. Almost one might imagine them as they entered the drawing room, questioning and wondering, toying with the flap of hanging wallpaper, asking would it hang much longer, when would it fall? Then smoothly brushing the walls, they passed on musingly, as if asking the red and yellow roses on the wallpaper whether they would fade, and questioning gently, for there was time at their disposal, the torn letters in the wastepaper basket, the flowers, the books, all of which were now open to them and asking, were they allies? Were they enemies? How long would they endure? And it goes on like that. The airs that are sometimes they're ghostly, they have feather-light fingers and the light persistency of feathers, and it goes on like that through the house, which is decaying, and yet at this time is scrubbed and seems to come back to life, but certainly not as it once was. And Woolf has this tremendous power. Like Doreen, you asked, is that one sentence? Yes, one sentence. To start a sentence and to pile it on in this accumulative, lyrical way, which adds, I think, to this, what I call the pulse, this organic pulse of the book, which is really, really extraordinary. Doreen, you also use the word shift. And I find that I've written in the margins of my book, oh, it shifts. The tone shifts. The viewpoint shifts. She goes in one direction and then suddenly it changes and it shifts and it shifts and it shifts. Just this remarkable creation. I don't know how she did it, but she did do it. Those of us who write poetry, we can do it in short pieces. She's done it for all these pages.
The way that, to put it in another way, I looked at her writing as being very elliptical, which is perhaps another way of saying that there's a pulse to it, in that the way she related things was elliptical, and in fact often would sort of turn back and someone would come back in and disappear and then someone else. And I think intentionally the antecedents of prepositions were unclear often. So that is intentionally confusing. And so then you come back and go, no, who's speaking? Who's he? Who's she? Where are we? This kind of thing. And I think that added much to the pulse. But also the confusion is a little bit of the chaos that I was getting at.
Yes, yes. James Wood, I think it was Wood, the critic, wrote recently, mentioned in passing, and he was reviewing some book, I forget which book, and he mentions Woolf, he mentions To the Lighthouse, and he said that she has the power, the narrator here, has the power to be both inside the character and then outside of the character. So that's where we also get the shift. We get into the stream of consciousness and we get, then Woolf sort of pulls back and the tone shifts and she's outside of the character. But it's as if,
And a different character.
Mhm.
yeah. But it's as if she's got this globe and she's moving the globe and all of these pieces are floating inside it. They coalesce at one point, they break apart, they coalesce, they break apart. This house of childhood, definitely. Well, we could go to, the business of what makes it this a modernist work. How would you define modernism? Well, it was the turning away from the Victorian view of art, from the strict narrative. Probably what drove you crazy about this book, Jay. Where are we? What's going on here?
I didn't realize I was so Victorian.
Well, there's nothing wrong with a plot. I like a book with a good plot too. And to experiment with a different type of story, to get away from the story. There is no story here, is there? The people are in a house. They talk about, let's go to the lighthouse. They don't go. The flowers are blooming. Time passes, so we know that, and then they come back. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, some of them, by the way, die, but yes.
Oh, yeah,
There's a
but
structure, but not a story, right?
a structure, but not a story. Exactly. There's a structure that's not a story. And then, of course, the stream of consciousness.
I might disagree a little bit because I think it's Mrs. Ramsey it's her story
Mm.
principally. She's certainly to me the protagonist who's by far the most interesting, involving, attractive, etc. But Lily Biscoe is the one who kind of, it's her story from the very beginning of trying to make a painting of the window.
Yes.
And then at the end, she gets the vision. And so in my view, she's a little bit of more of a stand-in for Virginia Woolf. And so she has her provision by the end of this book. Lily Biscoe, then I don't know if it worked on the canvas, but it worked in her mind.
Yes.
So anyway, so for me, it's their two stories in different ways.
It's just, yeah, that's a story. But when I was talking, I hear what you're saying, but when I was talking about the plot, there's something called the marriage plot where, Jane Austen novel, then a couple finally comes together and then there's a resolution. That's not quite the way it works. It's much more diffuse than that. In a more conventional novel, the author would have made a lot about the deaths. And Woolf doesn't do that, but we'll talk about that certainly in a little while. More recently, it seems that novelists have gone back to more traditionally plotted novels, and turned away from the kind of thing that Woolf was doing. I don't know, maybe that's too much of a generalization. Well, what about, to change the subject to.
There's some that do follow her, like, yeah, I've read some books that they're definitely more experimental in following her way. Like one of my favorites was Kashua Isuga, The Unconsoled, was a book that was very, you know, diffuse and dreamlike, and so and that's a pretty recent one. But you're generally spot on.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Mark, you mentioned the phallic passages about, you know, Mr. Ramsay and his insistent sort of beak-like attack and need for attention. What about all of that in the novel? You know, Woolf's ideas and portrayal of gender. I mean, it seems to thread all, you know, throughout the whole book, really. The son wants to kill the father because, you know, and the father, well, I won't talk. I'd like to hear what other people have to say about it.
Okay, my feeling is the feminist thing is obvious. Okay. And I'm not sure whether she was breaking a barrier at this time and presenting that. And to a degree, I guess, to enhance the feminine side, she almost had to degrade a little bit the masculine side. That the feminine was beautiful, the feminine was strong, the feminine was the social fabric of society. The masculine could not get past R. It suffered from the Peter principle, that it had reached its wherever its level was going to go, but couldn't go beyond that. And had, whether it be the son trying to adjust to the father, which he really couldn't do, while the daughter finally sort of came to peace with her relationship with the father.
Yeah.
I guess my feeling was on the gender, it was okay, sort of a breakout thing to say, I really want to talk about the strong points of feminism and make them even stronger by talking perhaps about the weaker points of masculinity.
You know, Miriam, I'm going to step back a little bit because I did have a few general thoughts that I wanted to share that'll
Sure.
kind of circle back.
Go ahead, Dan.
And to your choice also, I was so happy that we chose this book because I literally, I only read it, I guess now 40 some years ago.
Oh, gee.
And so I was a late teen in college, and the only part that I remembered was time passes. That's the part that I was like, oh, that's what caught my attention back then 100%. Like, this is really different. And, you know, kind of like a literary rendition of the law of entropy, or the second law of thermodynamics. And just you know, beautifully done. So personifying a lot of physicality and particularly decay. In coming back to it this time, and I was wondering when in the window part, I was like, is this the book that has that section I really loved about the house falling apart? And it was. It took me a little while to get there, but now with slightly different eyes, part one to me was amazing in it being such a dissertation on wifery or wiffery and motherhood.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of tensions going on, you know, both in the marriage and otherwise. Maybe to speak to gender quickly, there's a little bit of Oedipal complex, and I used to be a Freudian guy back in college. I'm no longer, but this seems like, okay, well, maybe a little Freud there getting in. But Time Passes still was I thought, blockbuster. And then the third part, To the Lighthouse, I have to admit, you know, the light went out of the book when Mrs. Ramsay went out. And they honestly seemed like a bunch of sad sacks in the last part. You know, it's like Lily has a little bit of something or another. But it's a pretty sad group without Mrs. Ramsey. That's kind of just doesn't have it any longer. So I did find it to be, I think as Jay was saying, a little bit of like a proto-feminist, but I definitely saw that the male characters were, I mean, this is a difficult decade for Great Britain. And there's the end of the Victorian era was bringing in a lot of confusion compared to what I guess was a lot of certainty in gender roles, et cetera, in the Victorian era. But it was a tough time, and that you already see, particularly in the male characters, what I would say is like premonitions of the empire is going to fall, right? That these guys just aren't, they don't have it together. And I would say that Mr. Ramsey trying to get to art and being hard on himself, not able to get beyond it, had turned into such an egotistical, selfish guy. But anyway, but I second a little bit of what Jay said. It seemed proto-feminist, not entirely feminist. My heroine, Mrs. Ramsey, is trying to get everyone married off.
Yes.
Right? So there's a lot of interesting things going on.
He believes that that's the great thing. That's the great thing.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Ramsey is the patriarch of the family, and what Woolf emphasizes over and over again is his tremendous need for sympathy, and that
Desperate. Yeah.
desperate need for sympathy, and it has to come from Mrs. Ramsey or from women.
Or Lily, yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to agree with Ben and Jay, but put a different slant on those things.
Yes.
So I'm going to agree that the third section is different and is definitely a dispirited section, and I'm going to agree that she is very much making one aware of the limits of male dominance and control of the world, and the ability to masterfully control things, and the affairs of finance and India and everything else.
Yes.
And logic and the limits of logic she does all those things, but I have a different slant on both, because to me this is a philosophical book, and there's a yin and a yang. So this book is all about saying it's not just the male dominance. There's a whole female side of philosophy. There's a whole world that your philosophy doesn't even touch on. And it's all together. I feel like she's actually rather balanced. In fact, I hear her voicing, male arrogance, the views, women can't write, women can't read, women can't do art, or even as a child, the boys, when the brooch is lost down by the sea, women, she can't control her emotions. Women can't, it's like that. There's just, there's the views of, and then Mrs. Ramsey's own views of herself, being subservient to her husband and reverencing him and worshiping him and all of his arrogance and everything else. I mean, she may be a feminist in some way, but she is not. She is a Victorian woman whose thinking is just beyond Victorian. So I think it's all about, and the point that you made then about the third act. So that lost, the time passes section is the end of the old world order. It's the end of Victorian civilization. It's the after World War I. Everyone, the entire world and all the art that comes out of it after that is all about what you do after the Great War, and everything that you believed about human nobility has proven to be complete balderdash, and we're just primitives dashing against each other, and there's no certainties, there's no. I mean, I think that one of the beauties of that section is how it represents the passage of the World War and death and everything that's happening behind the decay of the whole house. And it's so again, what you're left with is salvaging, using art to salvage some integrity out of this dispirited wasteland. And so to me, there's a beauty, even though it's very, spare, that third section, there's a beauty in what's being done there. And I do think the whole thing is, yes, the limits of masculinity, but I just see it as more organic and a yin yang to the whole book. I'm done.
Nice. Yeah, no doubt Woolf was able to juggle things really admirably. So that's why I said proto-feminist, because there really were. I mean, that at one point, I think in my book, page 159, she talks about the admirable fabric of masculine intelligence. This is Mrs. Ramsay speaking. And yet a few pages earlier, and I think it's Lily Biscoe who looks at Mr. Ramsay and talks about his fangs. And so you have just as you're saying, Mark, a yin and yang. Woolf seems to be able to come at it from various different perspectives and give a fullness to it that is disturbing.
Yeah, it is, because they each see each other as wrong. They're right and the other is wrong. And so how can these two complete polar things, opposites, be both true? But that's one of the things that she does brilliantly, is she shows that things that are completely opposed to each other are still both true.
I just saw the role of the woman as keeping it all together. I mean, she was the conductor of all of this, right? I mean, just like you have instruments that are all really different from each other, and yet she kept it all together. She kept the children from fighting with each other and made sure they go to sleep by wrapping her scarf around it. She made sure that the food was done. She attended to her different guests and tried to get them together in the best of ways for each of them. And then she attended to her husband as well, and hardly attended to herself. But yeah,
And
she
then-
was, without the woman, things would fall apart.
She was almost the sun of the solar system.
But that's what a woman
her
does.
beauty was the one manifestation of that, but all eyes went to her.
All eyes go to her because of her extraordinary beauty. Extraordinary beauty. Some people say, is there anything behind that? And there seems to be. I was also interested in these sections when Mrs. Ramsay is alone. And there's a remarkable, this is in the window when the light of the Lighthouse, I keep wanting to say White House. The light of the lighthouse, sort of beams in, and it really is extraordinary. Losing personality, one lost the fret, the hurry, the stir, and there rose to her lips always some exclamation of triumph over life when things came together in this peace, this rest, this eternity. And pausing there, she looked out to meet that stroke of the lighthouse, the long, steady stroke, the last of the three, which was her stroke. For watching them in this mood, always at this hour, one could not help attaching oneself to one thing, especially of the things one saw. And this thing, the long, steady stroke, was her stroke. Often she found herself sitting and looking with her work in her hand, until she became the thing she looked at. That light, for example. So she becomes the things that she looks at. And then below that, she thought how if one was alone, one lent to inanimate things, trees, streams, flowers, felt they expressed one, felt they became one, felt they knew one, in a sense were one. Were one. This is extraordinary. Felt an irrational tenderness thus. She looked at that long, steady light as if for oneself. There rose, and she looked and looked with her needle suspended there, curled up off the floor of the mind, rose from the lake of one's being, a mist, a bride to meet her lover. Wow. Now this is what we have here is a vision of a woman who's complete in herself. In this moment.
In the moment.
Rose, curled up off the floor of the mind, rose from the lake of one's being, a mist, a bride to meet her lover. So both receptive, and what's extraordinary to me in this section is that she's defined, and yet she's not. She becomes what she this tremendous receptiveness. Call it feminine, I don't know what it is, but it seems to be the core of her being. And she's by herself and connected to the world in this tremendously sympathetic way.
It's a very feminine oriented book, but I didn't feel like it was as, lacking empathy for the male point of view, even though it was poking fun at it.
No, not at all. And then at the very, very last, there's sympathy actually for Mr. Ramsay.
Oh, a great deal. And at the end, he conquers. He has his moment at the end of the book. It's quite a statement.
Yeah.
There is no God. Leaping into space. Yeah. It's no, I think she's very sensitive to everyone, including the males, which she is charged.
Woolf is very subtle. I no doubt about it. I'm just thinking. I kind of view the book as having two main events. The less obvious one is Lily Biscoe's painting. So that starts in the beginning and that has some resolution in the end, and it weaves through the various characters and challenges of the book. But the other is really the formative, the first pages, and that is the, contretemps between parents about James's expectations. Right, and for a lot of those first pages, it makes it sound. We sympathize with Mrs. Ramsay's. In a sense, we have emotional intelligence. It's a little psycho, pop psychology. The women have emotional intelligence, and the men here are all these rational guys trying to get beyond R in the alphabet. But that for a long while, Charles Tansley and Mr. Ramsay seem like monsters, absolutely killing the spirit and hopes of this little sensitive boy, James. But then I have to say then my book, page 173, but well advanced in part one, Mrs. Ramsay has her own moments. She's angry at Mr. Ramsay, at Tansley, and at herself. And why? For having raised his hopes. And that's James. And remember that at one point, Mr. Ramsay says, "Damn you." I mean, that for a Victorian is a pretty emotionally charged moment where we have this clash between father and mother, and Mr. Ramsay goes as far as to say, "Damn you," and Mrs. Ramsay is much smoother, but she also, I mean, so the subtlety of Woolf is something. So that Mrs. Ramsay has her own realization that maybe what she had done was not the right thing.
Yeah.
The marital story is
Yeah.
quite interesting. There's that one point where Lily sees them, or one of them sees them as symbols of marriage. But I love how at the end of the passage you're talking about, when he kind of comes down out of his passion and he goes outside, she describes it like a walrus in a zoo that's, flopping out and, making a big splash. And she just had such an amazing way of words. I think, Miriam, we could spend a week just citing great passages from this book. It's so filled with wonders of observation and language. But the other story, though, that does thread through the whole thing isn't just about James' expectations. It's the story of getting to the lighthouse, right? So that's the mission of the book to be fulfilled. Yeah.
True.
Well,
So
should we talk a little bit about,
the lighthouse.
yeah, which question would you like to deal with? I was very interested in Woolf's placing those deaths in short sentences and putting them in brackets. Do you think it was effective for her to do that, the way we learned of Mrs. Ramsay's death?
It didn't work in the audio version.
It didn't.
You can see
I'm
it.
just going to say it completely fell flat in the audio.
For me, it worked.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding, Doreen.
I thought it worked too. I mean, I think it was more shocking. And I said to myself, well, why did Woolf do this? I think she didn't want a long deathbed scene. She didn't want to make it part of the story. And I think she wanted to just give more emphasis to what Mrs. Ramsay was like when she was alive, and to make death, well, first of all, it's very shocking the way she does it. And then on the other hand, I thought, well, it's not that important. In other words, in the great scheme of things, it's not that important. And also she doesn't want to give space to it. And then one of the children dies in the war. There's an explosion. And then Prue dies in childbirth. And it's all in brackets, as if Woolf is saying, I'm going to have my poetry, and I'm going to have that house of childhood. And that's where I'm going to give my imagination. And that's where I'm going to give space to that, but I'm not going to give space to death.
That's Justice and Beauty dying, by the way. In the name, when whoever it is who names the kids after the kings, Justice dies in the war and Beauty dies in labor during the war.
I felt maybe a little bit differently about that. I felt that she was giving greater emphasis by understating.
I agree with you. I think she does two things. It becomes very emphatic, and then philosophically, not much space.
Yeah, but I think also you mentioned, as you were writing, shift, that certainly in the case of Mrs. Ramsay, she was saying, and by the way, she died. And suddenly the novel changes. It's this huge shift, showing the importance of Mrs. Ramsay within the whole social context of what's going on. And by saying, rather than leaving it in the stream of conscious sort of poetic thought, to put it in parentheses in small letters, it almost draws more attention to it and says, I'm about to change what I'm writing about here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ben.
No, you go ahead, Doreen.
I just kept thinking of like silly putty. I think someone else said it was like a globe, and inside the globe things coalesced. I think you said,
Yes.
Miriam. I kept thinking of like silly putty, you know, like you stretch it like this and then it comes together. So time in the first part is like elongated, right? Like every moment she's describing how the energy flows and she's in that moment and it's like vast. And then she like shrunk it. So like, how can you like play with energy like that and play with time and the sense of time? And the passage you read, she becomes like one with the time. She kind of like dissolves. So she's like stretching and dissolving and shrinking. And it was just amazing. I thought it was so effective because she can stretch out a moment and then she can condense years.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Miriam, you said earlier, pointed out how Woolf, and I would say particularly in part one in the window, is able to jump perspective. So it's like an interior narrative and then jumping out to something else. That worked in the first part. I think also what happened in Time Passes is, at first I thought, those brackets are kind of like stage directions. And that the focus is on the physicality, the house is the personality. But I'm not sure it's to diminish the death. It's a little more pointillist in the sense that is what happens in those brackets is the summation of Time Passes.
Yeah.
So that everything is burning up and decaying. The sun will go dark at some point, and all will be destroyed. And that, in a slower sense, is what's happening to the house. And then we get, well, these human beings, they burn up quickly sometimes.
Yeah. Well, in her life, Woolf was very, very attached to her mother and suffered terribly when her mother died. And the mother was a great, great beauty. Great, great beauty.
Mm.
And I guess she had 8 brothers and sisters, right?
I don't know how many altogether. She had a bunch. The mother had children with her first husband, and who died, and then she married Leslie Stephen, who was Virginia Woolf's, and then she had children with them. So I don't know how many altogether, but a bunch. So Woolf had brothers and sisters, and she also had half brothers.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were all boys from the first marriage. No, there was one who wasn't. I think one half sister. So it was a very rich and complicated family life. And her father was an eminent writer and scholar. And the mother, a great, great beauty, just a great beauty and remarkable.
Without knowing any of that, it felt very autobiographical, the whole thing. I felt like it was a memory from her childhood. And
Yeah.
then the last part is her development as an artist from that.
I was very interested in the character of Lily Briscoe, the painter who's just trying to get the line right and the placement right, which is really what artists, try to do. It seems like such a small thing to get the vision right. And of course, that's what Woolf tried to do and mostly succeeded.
And even while she's doing it, she thinks things like, telling stories about people. I mean, that's what she becomes, the philosopher. You know, that's what memories are. That's what the people are. Is the stories. So she's a lot of the comments throughout that whole section are just as applicable to writing fiction as to doing a painting. They're the same. It's all the same concerns. It's all about what you're capturing and why, and it's, the art is different from the other ways that the men in the first section were worried about their immortality and making their permanent mark on the world. It's very complementary. They both make their mark on the world, but yeah, it was I definitely felt the autobiographical. I didn't look up any of it, but I really felt that.
Well, I think you're right, because I believe there were 8 brothers and sisters, and they also did have a home on the shore
Yeah,
that they used to go to. So I think some of that does reflect while she was growing up. Yeah.
yeah, those summers were very, very important. They would, the family, the Stevens family would rent this large house. It was in St. Ives and Devon, and that world was really lived in Woolf's mind very, very much.
No, and about Bisco, and maybe we'll get to that, Briscoe, sorry, in talking about her vocation as an artist.
Yeah.
I alluded to her as somewhat of a, you know, a Woolf protagonist or stand-in, because she is the artist who has a vision by the end. But there is the question of fulfillment. If part 1 is about the Victorian marriage is a good idea, Briscoe obviously doesn't marry, although there was the possibility of that with Mr. Banks, I believe.
Yes.
And she seemed, I think she circled back, so maybe partly obsessed, but she circled back 3 or 4 times to, what was it, Tansley's telling her that women can't write and women can't paint. And just that that didn't go away. That stayed with her for more than a decade. And then you know, and then she has her moment, but her fulfillment almost was to show Mr. Tansley wrong.
Well, was not to read something into it that wasn't, but was Lily also having somewhat of an identity problem?
How do you mean, Jay?
Well, if you look on page, in my book on page 51, when she's talking about Mrs. Ramsay, and she's saying, couldn't loving, as people call it, make her and Mrs. Ramsay one?
Yeah.
Maybe part of the thing of her conflict of, do I like this guy? Don't I like this guy? Maybe she didn't like guys.
It could be. She says she loves Mrs. Ramsay. She wants to put her head on Mrs. Ramsay's lap, and she is. I think the term "in love" is really there in the book. She also says at one point she will not marry. She would not subject, and therefore subject herself to the indignity of marriage.
Right. Which may have been, again, that's why I don't know if I was reading too much into that or not. Not sure.
Yeah, what is Woolf doing with that? I don't know. She's gonna make her painting. That's what she's gonna do. And she's gonna work. She's gonna work.
But she can never get the tree in the right place. It's like, maybe I can't quite get my life in order here.
You know, Jay, I didn't see Lily's attraction to Mrs. Ramsay as sexual. I saw it as par for the course.
Yeah.
Everyone loves Mrs. Ramsay. I think even Charles Tansley, when and he takes her into town at one point, then just like he realized she was the most beautiful thing in the world, right? And he was so proud to have her bag, be carrying her bag.
Yes.
And that some laborer stopped put down his tools or whatnot and looked at the two of them. So she was just the sun in the solar system. So while she was alive, she was the only thing going.
Yeah, and
You-
yeah, he feels better about himself when he's with her.
Yeah, you could be right. I guess it's just that it seems a little bit strong when it says, can we be one? That's sort of a uniting of something. Not just a plutonic, hey, I think she's cool. I don't know.
I saw a lot of it as energetic. Like, can I have her energy?
Mm. Or her peace, her serenity as well, all of those things,
I love the ending of the scene that you mentioned, Ben, where as soon as you get outside of his head, where he's having this ecstatic moment of, being on top of the world, and then you're back into her head, and he's still this odious little man who just bothers her to no end. So it's like both things they're both true. That's how he's seeing it. That's how she's seeing it. They just are totally, totally different. And that's just fine.
I didn't say much about looking at this novel in terms of class structure, but here we have this house and this country house rented for the whole season, people coming and going, eating. There's the poet Carmichael. I just love the characterization of the opium taking poet in his slippers, shuffling in and out, and yet writing good poetry and all. So he's there.
And he's the only one on to Mrs. Ramsey, right? He doesn't fall for her.
No, he doesn't fall for her. It's not part of his world. He's musing on the couch, just shuffling in and out. And then we have, who else do we have? We have Charles Tanley, we have Mr. Banks, we have Minka. People come, they eat. There's servants. It's the servants who make the dinner. It's Mrs. Ramsey's recipe. So, here we have a view of solidly middle-class people with money and the troop of children and the richness of that life, but all facilitated, of course, and helped by having servants. How could you not? I mean, this is pre-vacuum cleaner or, no dishwashing machines here.
And not a single one of them had a name, or did she ever go into their thoughts, or do we ever see the world through their eyes?
Only in the last, when the cleaners come to clean
Oh.
the house.
Oh, yes.
Then
The end of time passes, yes.
Yes, and then they're there, and we do see them. Woolf,
That's true.
yeah, we do see them there. But she gives us such a picture of that type of life, unself-conscious, of course, about it, I think.
But you know what? I feel like they're almost part of nature. The women, the cleaning women in this case, they were not really real people. They were again, tools of fighting entropy or something. I didn't feel like they were, maybe I read it too long ago, but heard it too long ago, but I don't think of them as individuals so much as just older women who had limits to what they could do, and I just didn't feel like they were people that lived. I didn't see their thoughts in the same way.
They're almost like a chorus. They talk about the house, they talk about Mrs. Ramsey being gone, but I think I agree with you, definitely agree with you about that. But they are there. They certainly are there.
There's a short-sightedness to her viewpoint in her work. I would say that's it. It's the wealth and privilege point of view. It doesn't seem to go to the rest of the world.
Yes.
I think the visiting sycophants of Mr. Ramsey were described as being as poor as church mice. So,
Mhm.
so in that sense, they're all, without means, but they are trying valiantly to work their way up, intellectually, and using Mr. Ramsey as a stepping stone, perhaps.
We're at a kind of a pinnacle here. I think, that's clear, when the business of the husband is philosophy and everyone's in doctoral, programs, and, it's a deliberately pinnacled view of life. Like this is life at its finest. It doesn't get any more sophisticated than this. And that's part of the contrast between that and then time passes and what we're left with from that. But it is a big flaw. I mean, it is a big limitation. In retrospect, I think if she were writing today, she would go back and add something to that and try to help it. I think that's a lack of vision there.
I don't know if this is Miriam, stop me if I'm saying something incorrect, but the other day I came across this term womanism, which I had never heard before, and apparently Beyonce uses, because feminism came out of middle-class white women and a lot of women of color and women of other socioeconomic classes that weren't middle class, lower income groups felt that they had been left out of feminism. And so as a response to that, they have adopted this term womanism. And I don't know all the history behind it, but it would make it, if this book seems to fit into that, right? I mean, she had the time to experiment with other forms of thinking, other forms of writing, other forms of looking at reality that weren't maybe I got to make money form. But it is just curious to me. It seems to reflect that.
Yes and no. I mean, what can I say here? Woolf had her own problems. I mean, she was manic depressive, and finally, near the end of her life, sunk into
Killed
a
herself.
depression and then killed herself. So I really, won't judge her. There were problems with money. I mean, certainly not when she was growing up, but as an adult, after she married Leonard Woolf, they had very, very little money. He would keep the books. I think she only made money with her writing with Orlando, and that was pretty far along in her career. But still, they were able at that time to buy a house, and which they finally fixed up when she began to make a little bit of money. But I wouldn't judge her for that. I mean, if she became very self-conscious about class and the servants, I think she couldn't write. She'd be delivering speeches. The writer and her contemporary, E.M. Foster, wrote Howard's End, and we certainly get a picture there of the classes, and in the character of Leonard Bast, who it is not of the class of the people who own Howard's End, and what happens to him. So we do get that sense, but not in Woolf. It was not, I would say, a tremendous part of her thinking and of the mind that she used to create fiction.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, and I can't judge her for that. I really can't.
No, I'm just saying it's a limitation. Sorry, Doreen. I just say it's a limitation. That's all. But what were you saying?
Yeah.
I didn't mean to judge her. I just hadn't realized that there was this critique of feminism from a class and race point of view until recently.
Oh yeah, definitely. And the feminist movement was criticized from the very, very beginning for really not including people of color and understanding what that was all about.
So are we going to get to the lighthouse? Because I love that question, and I thought about it.
Go ahead, Mark. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I'm not sure I have too many ideas about that. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I mean, I thought what was great about it is that it was the lighthouse, because the whole book, we're swimming in this complex, fluid waves of perspective that are shifting kaleidoscopically, but always at the top of the wave, we see the lighthouse. It's always this beacon that that gives us perspective. So I feel like, you know, it's the stability, it's the lasting rock, the thing that grounds the story. And so for me, it was, she calls it a pattern that gave shape. I guess I would say that. I mean, but more than that, I think it's just completely apt that it was literally a lighthouse whose function is to guide in the ships who are lost and need to be, you know, come home, and across the waves they find their way to it from this lighthouse. I thought it was the idea of having it as something that's distant, that can't be reached, and then at the end conquering it like as in part of a heroic adventure, was like such a wonderful grounding element to the book to me. So I wonder what other symbology or role people think about that.
That's good. And that scene that I read parts of, in which Mrs. Ramsey is sitting and becoming part of things, that's punctuated by the beams of the lighthouse, that 1, 2, 3. So maybe we shouldn't believe Woolf, but in her mind, it was like Lily Briscoe's line, you know, that would sort of anchor thing. And she was really talking about aesthetics and the structure of the novel. Maybe she was just, sometimes writers just say things and deny things, but we don't have to listen to them, right?
I
Well, the word-
equated it, besides light, with compassion, because she was going to the lighthouse to deliver like something to this little boy and the dad there,
Yeah.
you know, the disabled boy, and give him something. And these people that were sacrificing in the lighthouse for the good of us all.
Yeah.
So for me, the lighthouse was like compassion, and that is sort of like what you aspire to. And when the father didn't want to go there at first, it was maybe because he didn't have enough compassion. And she was encouraging the child to go, to be more compassionate, to help others. In her free time, she was knitting to help others. She was knitting us all together, and the beacon was compassion and some kind of humanity, helping others. For me, that's what came through to me.
That's so interesting that you focus on the compassion, which is very real. And it makes me think about a religious interpretation of the lighthouse, the spiritual, you know, the beacon that is the spiritual or religious transcendent thing that we strive to reach. And it also then makes you think about the irony of him stepping out there as if to say, there is no God.
Yeah, you know, the lighthouse was, remembering that it was immensely delayed by over 10 years. And in some ways, gratification delayed was gratification denied. And particularly for James, you know, or something, because if you think of it, that boat full of people going to the lighthouse were all at each other's throats, practically. I mean, and not the local natives. They were just being, being there or whatnot. But that Mr. Ramsay just read his book, non-communicative. And whether or not they're doing good works, or I don't know, but can you think of a less cohesive, less I don't know what group of people going somewhere? And remember, I guess the kids felt forced into it at this point. They didn't really want to go, and so it's I don't know. I'm interested to hear what others think as well, because I'm not sure that it's it's a happy ending.
I don't think it was a happy ending, because I think the lighthouse was the unachievable goal.
Hmm.
And when they almost got there, the sort of thought was, we all perish alone.
Oh, yeah, that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we finally kind of reached the goal,
Hmm.
and it's pretty horrible.
And the lighthouse itself is the most lonely, desolate place. I mean, so it
Yeah.
goes into what it's like for them for a month. They're on a patch of rock the size of a tennis lawn, and the elements sweeping by, and how desolate and lonely. So I kind of, I don't know. I tend to think of the lighthouse as not giving that much light. I do agree that it's the sort of North Star for all of these characters,
Mm.
but what it gives them, or what they achieve in it, I'm not sure.
Well, let's just say that the trip to the lighthouse would have been very different before the war,
Mm-hmm.
if it had happened when it was supposed to, than it was after the war, when it was like they're going because they're going to fulfill that unfulfilled destiny, whether it kills them, whether they like it or not. You wanted to go, I'm going to get them, I'm going to take you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, it's lost the luster, but they complete it, they fulfill. So it's definitely a hollow victory.
Well, I wonder, before the war and after the war, or before Mrs. Ramsay died and after Mrs. Ramsay died?
Mm-hmm.
They're the same thing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The-
I think they are tied together. The Mrs. Ramsay world is one in which everything ties together in a beautiful tapestry of love and caring, and it's all comes all the pieces fit everything. Then after the war is all about isolation, and everyone's wandering and can't get satisfied, and they're all off in their own separate worlds, and yet they still try to follow through in form, if not in spirit. So I think that it's not an accident that she dies between parts 1 and 3.
Yeah.
It's got to be. She's got to die
Yeah.
between the 2 parts.
I think though that Mr. Ramsay and the children in the boat, they come to some sort of peace with their father. That does happen.
Or call a truce, perhaps. Because they're going to be going to shrinks for the rest of their lives anyway. Or at least James will, but
Miriam, what was the lighthouse for you?
I'm sorry?
What was the lighthouse for you?
Oh, good question. I don't know if I can answer that. Something unattainable, something in the distance. I think it has to do with that. I don't see it as, godlike or illuminating. I don't know. I don't think I can answer it somehow. Yeah.
Well, neither can we.
Your questions are really wonderful, Miriam. They were really quite to the essence. Does anyone know if one of my favorite writers growing up was Faulkner? Was he influenced by? I mean, was he just really influenced by Virginia Woolf? This is the first time I've read Virginia Woolf, and I don't think I've, I always loved Faulkner's mastery and ability to just write just endless sentences that could do all these acrobatics. And here I'm hearing it in Woolf, and it's just masterfully done before him, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah. And also James Joyce, he was influenced by both of them, I think. Definitely.
So she wrote after Joyce, and then Faulkner wrote after the two of them, basically.
Faulkner wrote a bit after the two of them. And
Okay.
Woolf and Joyce were contemporaries. I don't think they never met, but they were contemporaries, and they were, thinking through the same things.
But Ulysses came out, she read Ulysses before completing
I think Ulysses came out
To the
before-
Lighthouse.
Yeah, To the Lighthouse. And
Uh-huh.
the question would be, she wrote a book called The Waves, which is very experimental. And the question is, when did The Waves come out? Must have been after Ulysses, but we can check that easily. I was also intrigued by the one recording, she has the most plummy upper class voice that you can imagine in that recording from the BBC, and she has a little bit of a lisp, but the thing about the words living in the mind, I mean, that really struck me. And then I went back to this passage in To the Lighthouse that was incredible, where oh crap, I lost the page, where the words actually light up in Mrs. Ramsey's mind in this incredible way. And the words have colors with them, which I thought was incredible. They're different colors, they're yellow, they're red. So it's this kind of synesthesia. And that answered, oh, here we go. And she waited a little, knitting, wondering, and slowly those words they had said at dinner, the China rose is all abloom and buzzing with the honeybee, began washing from side to side of her mind rhythmically. And as they washed, words like little shaded lights, one red, one blue, one yellow, lit up in the dark of her mind and seemed leaving their perches up there to fly across and across, or to cry out and to be echoed. And so she turned and felt on the table beside her for a book. Now that's incredible. It's said about Nabokov that he also saw words in that way, but it's as if the words are things, lights in your head, in your mind.
He does an awesome job of describing that the mental creative processes, and it's not just her, it's also for Lily. There was one of the things that I was gonna maybe read out where Lily's thinking is like a swarm of gnats that kind of go around in this way, and then all of a sudden one of the kids shoots a gun, and then a flock of starlings comes out, and it's like, just awesome prose. But it's just the way that she will describe the interior thinking and feelings. There's right before the early part of the passage that Jay picked out as his favorite was when she's describing this fountain of fecundity of imagination and feeling, and that that's she just really has words for things that don't have words.
Yeah, you know, the words living in the mind, it made me think, Miriam, of, I mean, it's a unique God-given human capacity, right? Because no other, animal has that ability. It
Do we
really
know
was,
that?
well, it seems pretty clear to me, but maybe,
We don't know that. I mean, we don't know how other animals think. I don't know if anyone's seen My Octopus Teacher.
Oh, I haven't seen it, but I've read about,
Oh,
yeah.
it's a wonderful documentary. I mean, we have intelligence, but we don't know if other, I mean, I don't know. We do have that capacity, but I couldn't say that others don't.
it's true that you can't prove they don't have it. I agree with you there. But, and we do know that whales speak to each other over long distances, so
And
communication
trees
exists.
too.
Sorry,
Trees too.
sorry, 3 is 2?
Trees,
Trees communicate in some way.
plants and trees through their root
Yeah,
system
uh-huh.
communicate.
Yeah, but
My dog certainly knew a lot of words.
true. So it's a stretch to go from that to words. So I still think that there is a unique human ability, and that they are live. And that's something that we really are privileged to have.
Well, Wolf is now one of my favorites. I'm going to definitely read some more from her. I never tried reading her before, and I'm just very, very glad to sample this. So
What would you recommend next, Miriam? I've read Mrs. Dalloway and Orlando, but a long time ago.
I would definitely recommend a book called Moments of Being. It's not fiction. There, at one time, Woolf and her pals had, I think they called it the Memoir Club, and they would meet and they would each would read, a particular memoir that they had written, and some of Woolf's are really wonderful. So I would recommend Moments of Being, and I would definitely recommend Orlando, which is, truly marvelous. And then of course her, A Room of One's Own is her, the feminist document. And that's very, very interesting. Different kind of writing.
not the waves.
Well, the ways I read the way, I think I really didn't understand it when I read it. I read that years and years ago. I think that would be interesting to read as well. I think I'd like to go back to that.
Mhm.
But Orlando was really wonderful, and Moments of Being is one of my favorites.
I never even heard of that one, so I'm glad you suggested it.
Yeah, it's really good and easy. I mean, it's the kind of thing you can sort of pick up and read one complete memoir and, think about that
Mhm.
and look at that.
Okay, thank you.
So interesting.
Well,
So,
thanks.
do we have a book for next time?
We do. It's a Death in Venice.
Oh, Death in Venice. Oh,
Yeah.
God, yeah.
So, and remember, Jay was the person who suggested to the Lighthouse. So brilliant choice and brilliantly exegeted. So thank you.
I think that was my choice, actually. And I
Oh,
was
I'm
going to
sorry.
thank,
Oh,
I was going to
It was.
thank Miriam for taking it on.
okay.
I don't know that I certainly couldn't have done it without having the written book, that's for sure. But I was just glad to swim in those waters without having to make full sense of it enough to lead a discussion on it. So
My
I was
apologies.
really appreciative.
Actually, I think Death in Venice was Jay's idea, so I was just getting them mixed up.
Right.
Jay had the first and third, and I had the second and fourth, and was lucky enough to trick Miriam into volunteering for this.
A great suggestion, Mark, particularly having never read Virginia Woolf, so that was inspired.
You sort of getting the absolute best of her. Reading it on one point when I thought of her life, I felt very, very sad that it had ended the way it did. A person, I remember saying to my husband after I read this again, I said, God, she was a genius, you know? I mean, it's just the lyricism and, you know, the words that light up
Mm.
red, yellow, blue in the mind. I mean, it really, really shines through.
But she,
It's yeah, it's gonna last maybe not as long as a stone, but it'll definitely last for a good long while.
well,
Will,
but genius or even getting to R or beyond R can also make you very unhappy.
yeah, yeah.
So,
But you know,
Wow.
she and her husband, I mean, they did such marvelous things. They started the Hogarth Press, and they actually set the type. This is way before computers and cold type. And they brought out, you know, Catherine Mansfield, Sigmund Freud, T.S. Eliot. They did remarkable work. And he was a tremendous worker, and so was she, despite her affliction, you know. Um, so
amazing.
remarkable.
Rarefied indeed.
And now we're going to go to Thomas Mann.
Right.
Oh, did anybody ever see the film with Dirk Bogarde? He plays
I don't think so.
Eschenbach. Oh,
Worth seeing.
don't read it. Don't look at the film until after you've read it, if you haven't read Death in Venice before.
Excellent advice. The book
Okay.
first, always.
Read any of these books. I hadn't read The Trial,
Mm.
Ivan Illich. I haven't read any of these. So this is like an education.
Yeah, we're having a nice run on some good classics, huh?
Yeah.
And
And-
it's nice to find a group that likes to read the classics that I missed as well.
Hey, and death is the theme throughout, and this was not it.
Right, Death in Venice, yeah.
And that was like, no one was told to do it, but that's just how the suggestions are coming out and getting voted in.
Well,
But
maybe
it's
the next,
been a tough year, so maybe this
Yeah,
is to raise
tough
the
year.
spirits.
maybe the next book I can do is The Joy of Cooking.
We should look for something a little bit lighter. Yes, you're right.
No,
We
this
should
is
have.
great. This is great. Well, Miriam, thank you as always. And sorry I didn't see your email, but I'm so glad you found or retrieved my number. That was brilliant.
I hope Ben hasn't blocked his phone number, but it popped up right away and I was able to call you. So it's been
Fantastic.
great. You made my evening. It's good to connect with everyone.
A pleasure.
Indeed.
Take care.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Bye. See you next
Stay
time.
well. Take
Wow.
care.
You too.
Right on.
Bye.
Well.